You mentioned on your website that you have the potential for energy densities greater than 600 watt hours per kilogram, so gravimetrically, and volumetrically, 1200 watt hours per liter. Are you achieving this on these test cells already, or is this more theoretical?
It's not theoretical. Actually, it's more engineering that's a challenge than theoretical. Because I do not know any other way to fully exploit the lithium-ion battery potential other than using this kind of approach that we are taking. The powder approach has its limitations, and they will stay there. I cannot see those limitations going away. So we are not limited by the anode, but rather by the cathode technology. Since we do not have any formation of dendrites, we really, can really go unlimited amount of cathode loading, which we don't know what the limit is.
Well, I'm honored today to be joined by the founder and CEO of POSi Energy, Dr. Devendra Sadana. And we have a great conversation today all about really a technology that is going to hopefully revolutionize battery anodes. And I know we talk about battery anodes a decent amount on this channel. It's because it's an important part of a battery, but he has specifically developed an alloyed lithium silicon anode that promises to really provide a high performance battery of the future. So thank you so much, Dr. Devendra Sadana, for coming on today. If you could start by introducing yourself and a little bit about yourself and your background.
Thank you, John. Thank you for inviting me for this interview. I have nearly 47 years of experience in silicon CMOS, both on materials, processes, and technology. I got my PhD in 1975, and after that I went to the University of Oxford in England, worked there for 3-4 years, and after that I went to UC Berkeley, followed by work at Philips Research Lab, and then finally I ended up at IBM T.J. Watson Research Center in 1987. I led some really great scientists and engineers at IBM. We build each other's career, so to speak, and we are able to write almost 800 patents, in my team for IBM, which was very heartening for us. And I think I worked at IBM for 33 years, from 1987 to 2020, when I retired. And after the retirement, I formed this company. The last few years, in particular 3 to 4 years of my career at IBM, was really primarily focused on lithium-ion batteries. And then after I retired, I decided to form the POSi Energy company.
That really leads us into that next question. I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about POSi Energy. So you can start with the history of it. When did you start it? A little bit about why you started it, and anything that you want to share kind of about POSi Energy. Obviously, we're going to talk about one of the key technologies, the alloyed lithium silicon anode, but is there anything else around this company that you'd like to mention as we introduce the company?
It all started when IBM was working with one of the really very innovative scientists and my ex-manager, who actually came up with the idea of making a dust-sized computer for IoT, Internet of Things applications. So this was an amazing, actually, a project. And the thing which was really limiting its use was how to make this, create an onboard energy storage device on this dust-sized computer. And that's how I started thinking about it. And I immediately realized, even though I was working for a very small batteries for this IoT device, but the technology we created can be scaled up and can have profound implications for the energy storage industry at large. And that's how actually I ended up starting our company after I retired.
So let's actually move into this alloyed lithium silicon anode technology. I appreciate you giving that background. So obviously this is unique. This is not just like mixing a little bit of silicon with a graphite anode. That's kind of what you hear, a little bit of silicon added and maybe up 3 or 4% silicon added to a graphite anode. That's what you hear about a lot right now. This is an alloyed lithium silicon anode. Can you talk about what do you mean by an alloyed lithium silicon anode? What is that? And if you could talk a little bit about some of the metals that are in this alloy.
Sure, sure. Actually, it literally, uh, it really literally has lithium and silicon, that it implies. There's nothing more in it. And so the metal we are using is lithium. We are mixing it with silicon and creating a lithium silicon alloy. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so very simple. When you're talking about silicon, we're gonna dive into some of the the details about how the intercalation process actually works in a minute here. But why is it different than when other companies are just working on a silicon anode, a 100% silicon anode? Is it any different than some other companies are working on? Is there a different process here? I know you can't talk about like your secret sauce. You can't talk about stuff that would give away your technology. But what can you tell me about how this is different from what others are working on?
It's very different in the sense that all the, uh, at least the companies that I know of, are using silicon. And when they say silicon, whether 100% or some percentage of silicon in graphite, they are using silicon powder. We are using a slice of silicon, solid silicon. So it is different from that point of view. There's no powder here. It's just as I say, solid silicon, and our anode resides on the surface of this solid silicon.
Very good. Okay. Let's talk about the difference between these alloyed lithium silicon anodes. So that technology. Talk about the limitations of a graphite anode or even a graphite anode that has a little bit of silicon. What are the limitations of that technology, and how does your technology hope to solve those limitations?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the heart and soul of our IP. There's a profound and fundamental difference between the way the graphite uh, anode-based architecture works versus the architecture that we have created with the lithium silicon alloy. It is really quite significant. For the last 3 decades, maybe, or over 2 decades anyway, the graphite-based lithium-ion battery is a fixed in its architecture. What you have is a graphite anode, a separator, electrolyte, and a cathode. A cathode, as you know, is the reservoir of all the energy of the lithium ions. Anode is an extra load in a lithium-ion battery. Ideally, you would not like to have any anode, if possible. Just use the cathode, send the lithium, over the surface of some kind of electrolyte. People are trying to do that, for example, with solid-state electrolyte, or create an anode-less technology. What our architecture fundamentally differs from the graphite architecture is that by this lithium silicon alloy anode. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. And also, so in the graphite technology, you have an anode and cathode, but there's a relationship in the loading or thickness of the anode with respect to the cathode. Typically, it's about 1.2. So if you're using, 1 gram or one measure of thickness or mass of the cathode, you have to have 1.2 times of that mass of the cathode in the anode. So as a result, the architecture is very fixed. You really cannot do anything with this one. Our technology has fundamentally changed that. We have no relationship between the anode loading and cathode loading. They're completely decoupled. So what it does is that we can make anode as thin as possible and cathode as thick as possible. And that's what gives us the huge advantage in getting the energy densities that we have mentioned before, or we'll be discussing maybe down the road. So the just for example, we can use, let's say, 25 to 50 micron of silicon and use 200 or 250, 300 micron of cathode. You can see a ratio now. We have ratio in our favor, so you can imagine that how much volume in this small volume, how much energy you can actually squeeze, and that's what gives us a huge advantage. The other thing which is really fundamentally different and very important is part of the reason that the graphite anode-based battery can really function only with to maybe 4 to 5 milliamp hour per square centimeter, sort of in the current density. Our technology has no such limitation. We already have made more than 10 milliamp hour per square centimeter aerial densities, and that's not the limit. That limit was imposed because of the calendaring of the cathode. If you put too much mass in the cathode, the particles start to come off. So we are not limited by the anode, but rather by the cathode technology. So we have two fundamental differences with respect to the graphite, just to highlight that. One, no relationship between the anode and cathode, and no limitation on the cathode loading. And even more important is that in the graphite technology, if you put too much cathode loading, you start to form lithium dendrites. And as I mentioned before, it limits the current density to 4 to 5 milliamp hour per square centimeter. Since we do not have any formation of dendrites, we really, can really go unlimited amount of cathode loading, which we don't know what the limit is. As I mentioned to you, it is limited by the calendaring process and how much loading we can really get in the current technology. The third thing, which is again fundamentally different from the graphite technology, is that there is no intercalation, and that is so we are basically having the lithium coming from the cathode, depositing on this lithium silicon alloy anode, and just going back during the discharge. So during charging, it goes up on top of this anode, and the discharge goes down. The silicon is completely screened from any reactions, so there's no intercalation. So these are three very fundamental differences, which gives us a very unique architecture and record energy densities. And I think this is not the limit, in my opinion. Once this technology is adopted, we probably can far exceed even our own expectations.
Okay, so that really kind of explains what we were going to move to. You mentioned how there is no intercalation going on. There's no reaction in the sense of the intercalation, the normal intercalation that we see where the ions are going and they're finding their way into the graphite. It's actually, that's forming on the layer, sort of like an SEI layer would be. So it's forming on the layer of this alloy.
Correct.
That's what you're describing? Okay.
Yeah, it's basically depositing, first forming SEI and then depositing on top of the SEI.
Let's go ahead and move into the actual prototype cells themselves. What kind of sizes are we talking about here? Are we talking about multi-layered cells, large cells, small cells? What size cells have you been able to test so far?
So these are single cells. We are just a startup right now, so we are looking to raise the funds so we can really, really show some GV stuff with multiple cells. But for now, we are using only single power cells. The biggest area we have used so far is 20 square centimeter because of the setup we have right now, which is not fundamental. It could be scaled up to really any dimension, as big as the silicon can be made. So right now we are to answer your question. We have looked at two kinds of cells, 10 and 20 centimeters square in area.
Now let's move over to energy densities. Obviously, what you described earlier about not being limited by the anode and having really the limit being how much you can load that cathode, and that's pretty interesting. Where the cathode material actually becomes a limiting factor, which is what we want in a battery because the anode is usually what's holding it back. Right. So I think that's really great. You mentioned on your website that you have the potential for energy densities greater than 600 watt hours per kilogram, so gravimetrically, and volumetrically 1,200 watt hours per liter. Are you achieving this on these test cells already, or is this more theoretical?
It's not theoretical. Actually, it's more engineering that's a challenge than theoretical. If you do a very simple calculations, assuming 25 micron of silicon anode and let's say 200 micron of cathode, NMC or whatever it could be, LCO. We are agnostic to any kind of cathode. You can easily see I'm putting 10 micron of copper and 10 micron of aluminum. If you add the weight and volume, you will come up with these numbers. Even If you go to thinner silicon, you get even higher numbers. So these are so what the limitation is how to make the silicon thinner and be able to use it. So I think what we have done so far in our lab, we have demonstrated already close to 450 watt hour per kilogram for gravimetric and greater than 900 watt hour per liter so far. And we are going to demonstrate the ultimate, which is, as you say, 600 and 1200 numbers. Those are within reach. They are not really out of the reach.
Very good. This is actually a side note that I just thought about. So we're talking about energy density. What about power density? What kind of power density are we looking at for a battery cell like this with a very thick cathode? Is there an issue with, sometimes I'm not an expert in this, but sometimes when I hear about the thicker electrodes, a thicker cathode, that can limit, the speed of these ions in the cathode material. Is there any kind of issue with power density?
No, right now there are no fundamental limitations that we have seen. I think we'll maybe discuss hopefully in the next few minutes. It's really more to be limited by the internal resistance of the battery, not the fundamental of the battery itself. That's the only way I can answer your question right now.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about charging speed here, and we're kind of moving into that now, really, because I want to talk about the cycle life. So you mentioned on your website, and this is a quote from your website, that you've demonstrated working pouch cell prototypes with capacity fade of less than 0.04% per cycle over 300 cycles. So the first question is, what kind of charging rate, C rate, are we talking about here for that test? So we'll start with that question. Let's talk about what kind of C rates are we talking about when you make that claim? What kind of speeds are we talking about for charging?
Okay, so the way we do the test is that we start with C/10 charge rate, which means a 10 hour of charge and 10 hour of discharge to stabilize the battery. And then after that, our cells charge and discharge at a rate of C/4. So the 300 cycles we talked about with 0.04% per cycle pertain to C/4 charge rate.
Very cool. So C/4 is a 4-hour charge. Am I correct?
Yeah, 4-hour charge, 4-hour discharge.
Okay. Have you tried have you done any tests with like a 1-hour charge or faster, or have you stuck with the 4 for now?
No, we have done, in fact, that's a very interesting sort of another insight into our technology, which is quite remarkable. No, we have done 1C. We haven't done 2C. We have, done different charge rates, the cycling as they call it, C/10, C/5, C/2, 1C, and then bring it back up to C/2. So we have done those cycling. And the amazing thing about this technology is that it doesn't seem to matter what kind of cathode loading we use, at least to the extent what we have tested so far. Unlike the graphite technology, which is actually limited to certain cathode loading. As you increase the cathode loading, you also really impact the charge rate, capacity. The capacity decreases profoundly with the increasing charge rate. And that is, again, by the way, is related to the anode. People have, I think, a misconception that having a higher cathode loading gives you lower C rate because I had the same kind of misunderstanding, because the lithium cannot move from thicker, if you make it cathode too thick, lithium has to travel from the bottom of the cathode all the way to the top, and so obviously the diffusion length increases and your charge rate are impacted. Apparently not, so at least in the cells we have tested. Actually, the charge rate is dependent on the anode, the intercalation. This is the latest, some of the recent papers, if you read them, it is limited by the intercalation time, intercalation reactions that actually impact the charge rate, not the cathode thickness, at least to the first order. And we have found that in our batteries, because we don't have any intercalation, we don't have such charge rate effects by increasing the cathode thickness, again, in the regime that we have tested so far.
So you mentioned, okay, let's go back to capacity fade. So that less than 0.04% per cycle over 300 cycles. Now, what are we talking about like at 1,000 cycles? If you extrapolate that out, at 1,000 cycles, how much of a capacity fade have you seen total? Not per cycle, but on average total.
I cannot really exactly answer that because we are still testing the cell, and I'll tell you why I cannot really answer that very precisely. First of all, as you know, we are a startup company. We started about a year and a half ago. If I do 1,000 cycles, you can see from the time I developed the process and talking to you, I would not be able to complete the 1,000 cycles, which I have not, because it's very time consuming. That's number one. Now, extrapolation is very simple. If you take 0.04% and you take linear sort of extrapolation, it'll be 40% decrease, right? By the time you do 1,000 cycles. However, what we found is that because, again, we are in a sort of somewhat a R&D environment, we don't have manufacturing controls. And the pouch cells we made are really, they're not made with the best of the breed type of pouch cells you can get from manufacturing organization. So what happens if we realize after 300 cycles that the numbers we quoted you, 0.04% per cycle, the pouch cells actually, what happens during the cycling, the gases are formed, and we think there's a mechanical sort of separation between the anode and cathode, which leads to higher internal resistance and gives you the capacity fade. What we did is that we took this after 300 cycles, we actually use a mechanical clamp on them and try to make a better contact. And we got the capacity which was right at cycle number one. So basically, we have this very early work. We have done not on one, but 2 or 3 pouch cells by now. And in each case, after 300 cycles, if you test them again under the mechanical clamp, we get almost the original capacity with almost little no. So I cannot answer that question very precisely right now. But if I had a pouch cell which has a good mechanical contact and it stays there throughout the cycle, our number will be way below 0.04%. At this point, we are looking, would be 0.01%. I don't know what that number would be, but we are not seeing really any significant or any measurable loss in capacity after 300 cycle with the help of the mechanical clamps.
I'd like to move over now to, as we talk about, you mentioned you're still a startup. This is still early on in this process, but so far, what would you say are some of the limiting factors right now in this technology, and what are some of the big problems that you're still trying to solve in this technology?
Very, very, very important question. From the practical point of view, I think number one is the industry embracing an out-of-the-box solution. That's the biggest hurdle. But what the technology we have, the architecture we have, the anode we have is somewhat different, but different than the powder silicon. So that's the biggest, I would say, challenge to have the industry to adopt it. But the only thing I can say from what I know, at least as of today, I cannot see really, as we mentioned, the full potential of the cathode or full potential of the lithium-ion batteries. There's no way that I know of how the silicon works, how it really interacts with lithium, how it intercalates, what kind of structural damage it does. They know that technology will ever be able to do that. As of now today. So we are the only one who are showing a path to the industry how it can be done. Now the industry, hopefully, some of them will come forward and try to adopt it, and we'll work with them to make this technology manufacturable. It is actually a very manufacturable technology. It is really requires some somewhat, I would say, minor modification to the existing battery infrastructure. For example, if we are using the cannon ring right now, we are using anode sheets and cathode sheets and chopping them to whatever size we need them for the given capacity. Instead of putting huge rows, we can cut them into the size of the silicon. That's it, and then you start making cells. It's actually even simpler technology. If you think about it, you have a cathode, and you put a separator and put the anode right on top of the slice of silicon on top of that, you're ready to go. So it's as simple as that. Actually, from that point of view, it's a much simpler technology, but it is different, in this form factor. So our technology is suited more for prismatic cells right now. We are trying to develop the technology so it could be adapted for a round battery, but we are a little bit further away from that. But for now, as the technology we have can be immediately implemented for prismatic type of geometries. So I think that's the first hurdle that I see embracement of this out of box type of thinking. As I said, I don't see any other way that you are going to exploit the limits of the lithium ion battery unless you go in this direction. That's one. What are the other challenges? I think the challenge is going to be in the manufacturability, and I have looked into and I have worked on the energy um, uh, sector for a long time, harvesting and work on solar cells for some number of years. I have close to maybe 100 patents in the solar area. So you can use the solar infrastructure, silicon infrastructure, and combined with the lithium and battery infrastructure, you can make it work. Again, it requires somebody to accept this technology, adapt it, and then look into the options which already exist. We don't have to make a new equipment. From what I have seen, and I know of the solar industry and the battery industry, we have just a couple tools from solar area and and the other tools from the lithium ion battery technology. We can make it work. It's not an impossible job at all. And once it start working, I think it will probably hopefully fly. There are going to be challenges in the beginning in terms of the cost of ownership. We have already done calculations. We can meet of $100 watt hour per kilogram target with the assumption of thin silicon and certain cost structure, which is possible. It's not impossible at all. It is very much doable. We already have in my team in IBM, we actually, when we were working on the solar energy area, we actually developed a technique of spalling. It is such a simple and elegant technique to make thin silicon. You literally put a layer of nickel on silicon and you pull it and you get, because of the tensile strain in nickel, you can pull the silicon. And you can control the silicon thickness exactly with the, in proportion to the nickel thickness. So we already have that technology in place, which can be used to make thin silicon at extremely low cost. So we have a pathway. Again, it's the adoption of the technology. We have all the elements. Fortunately, I have been very fortunate to work with some really brilliant scientists at IBM, and we came up with all these solutions. And they now need to see the light of the day. That's where we are right now.
So I don't know if you've looked forward to this yet, but as you sit right now, do you see in the future, once this has been proven out, once you've made the larger cells, once you've gone through all those processes, do you see your company being someone who manufactures these batteries themselves? Or do you see your company licensing this out to others? Or do you see both? What's your path in the future for this technology? What do you think?
It's very clear. We are going to license it. We are not going to manufacture it ourselves. We are going to license it to OEMs and lithium-ion battery manufacturers, or either have a two-way partnership or three-way partnership where OEMs and lithium-ion battery industry work with us. So yeah, there's a very clear path for us. We are not going to manufacture it. It will be a licensing-based model.
Very cool. Well, Dr. Devendra, thank you so much for your time, for coming on. If you just want to close this conversation, anything that you want to mention about your company, the technology, something that we didn't mention that you want to close us with, and also if you could close us with how you would like the audience to reach out to either someone on your team, find your company, etc. If you can just close with that information.
Sure. I think I don't have to say too much. We have discussed everything in great detail. The only thing I can say is that one more time and emphasize that I do not know any other way to fully exploit the lithium ion battery potential other than using this kind of approach that we are taking. The powder approach has its limitations and they will stay there. I cannot see those limitations going away. I know people are trying very hard doing different things, but there are some fundamentals that goes against them. So I think at the end, this is the technology of the future. And I hope my audience, some of your hopefully audience are OEMs and lithium-ion battery manufacturers, and they look at it and maybe have a serious thinking about this technology. It is certainly out of the box type of approach, somewhat different than what the industry is used to. As I said before, it can be easily adapted to this in manufacturing at low cost by combining some elements of the solar industry and some elements of the lithium-ion battery uh, manufacturing practices, and it can be all made to work with very low cost. So that would be my sort of message. And what's the last thing? Oh yeah, in order to contact me, please you can I can send you information later on. But say POSiEnergy.com, POSi-energy.com, and we should be able to go to the website. You can contact me through there, or I can. My email is devendra.sadana@posi-energy.com. So either way, you can contact me. I'll be happy to, answer any questions you may have. And I hope this technology finds its way into the mainstream.
Well, thank you, Dr. Devendra, once again, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, John, for your time and giving me the opportunity to talk to you. It has been great. Thank you so much.
Do let me know what you think about all this in the comments section below. And also, if you work in the battery or automotive industry and you'd like to reach out to me, feel free to email me. My email address is John, Jon, at Cleanerwatt.com. Again, John, Jon, at Cleanerwatt.com. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Patreon supporters who support me every month and help make this content possible. A special thank you to my performance supporters and also the other supporters listed on the screen. If you'd like to find out more about the Patreon community I've set up, I'll put a link in the video description. Thank you so much.